Good evening, everyone. Good evening. There you go. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Williams. I am the director for the Fellowship Center for Racial Reconciliation. We are so glad that you are joining us this evening. However, we're glad that you're joining us, but there's a sense of sadness as well and as I get more into that sense of sadness, you'll understand better. Welcome to our COVID-19 Injustice and Asian American Experience, part 5, right? We did 4 parts last year. We started this webinar series toward the beginning of the shelter in place, toward the beginning of the pandemic. And I remember how much hope we had, especially for this particular webinar of us being able to do 2 things. One, to celebrate our Asian American brothers and sisters. And secondly, to shed light on the xenophobia and the anti-Asian hate and the anti-Asian violence. And I vividly remember when we're asking different friends of ours, different members of our congregation and friends who are not a part of fellowship, what's the one thing they would tell their friends during this season. And I remember there was this sense of hopefulness that we would come together as allies, that we would come together as accomplices, that we would accompany our Asian American brothers and sisters. And yet here we are a year later. The xenophobia didn't stop, the violence increased, and in fact, there were deaths that have occurred during this incredibly hard season. And so we're back, and we want to have this conversation 1 year later and hear from many of the people that we heard from last year. And then we're going to have some new people who are joining us to give us their perspective and to lend their wisdom and to tell their stories. And so tonight's an opportunity for us to honor our Asian American brothers and sisters. It's an opportunity for us to listen to what they have to say if you are non-Asian. If you are Asian, for you to be able to commiserate and to relate and to stand with your sisters and brothers who are going to be sharing some powerful things. And so again, welcome. And before we go any further, and before I introduce our wonderful panelists this evening, I would love to hear from fellowships from our own executive pastor, Scott Hitzel. Scott, take it away.
Well, good evening. Thank you, John. Thank you for everybody who's in attendance. And I also am here to honor my sisters and brothers in our Asian community, but also to lament. Just wanted to share just for a couple moments from the seat of a pastor, from the seat of somebody in senior leadership in a church that is multi-ethnic, the vantage point that I have, and the reason why I'm actually grateful and honored to be here. I've had an opportunity to sit through many of the webinars and even recently a few of the documentaries and various things, and I've learned so much. So thank you for allowing me to be in this space. We're over a year in, but it's not a surprise, or it is a surprise, but it's actually hard. Let me just be really candid. It's really hard to believe that, according to all the statistics that are out there, and I know that statistics have been updated, but within the first year of this global health pandemic, we had over 3,800 incidences reported to law officials of hate crimes against Asian Americans. 11% of those at the time, even before a year hit, were physical assault. They were violent in nature. We have seen incidents after incidents after incidents of even how national leaders have labeled this pandemic. And it's been hard to watch as a church leader. It's been hard to watch just friends and family members, and as a sibling to watch that. And I just want to share this on why I believe events like this are so important, and why I believe so much in our Center for Racial Reconciliation, and why I believe it's so important that we're all here this evening. This is a very sobering stat, and I'm trying to just be candid and honest with this. And this is something that John and I have discussed, that since the time COVID began, and we moved 1 year into COVID, Barna report, it's a survey, it's a nationally well-known survey. They actually reported that there was an 11% increase. I want you to think about what I'm saying. An 11% increase of people who self-identified as Bible-believing church goers in the United States, that said the issues of race and what is happening that we're even here to discuss today was not inspiring or less important than it was a year prior. I just want to sit on that for a minute. To think that as we watch everything that we watch, that the people who claim and call themselves to be the church would say that they're less interested and less engaged. I'm sorry, that's not good enough. I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. We've said it, and I've heard it said in various spaces, including this space, that we need to learn as a church how to actually disciple out racism while we're honoring people of all people groups. And there has to come a point where we as a church, and I'm talking as a church leader right now, have to ask, at what point do we become complicit in all this when we're not using our prophetic words or our provocative teachings, our spaces like this, to engage, to talk, to listen? I recognize as a white male, I'm here to listen, to lament, and to honor, and to celebrate. But there's so much to learn, there's so much to know. And I just want to say, on behalf of Fellowship Church, on behalf of Albert Tate, who is our senior leader, on behalf of our board who met even this afternoon and this morning, that we recognize the importance of these conversations. We stand in solidarity with you as siblings, and we just are praying that even tonight, this evening, that we'll find a space for healing, a space for learning, and a space for celebrating the things that God's doing, even in the midst of what we see the world doing, and even candidly in the midst of what we see the church not always stepping up to do, even though it should. So I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you, John, for having me. And I look forward to a great evening with our panelists. I recognize many of the names, and I'm looking forward to being here as a part of the group this evening.
Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate your words, and really appreciate, even more than that, your friendship. It really means a lot to me personally, that you are so committed, and that our church is so committed to true, authentic racial reconciliation and racial righteousness. Before we begin, I actually want to read something that I wrote last year in preparation for the first webinar that we did. And Hannah Belk and I wrote this. We said, imagine for a moment that in addition to dealing with being under quarantine and the threat of infection, you and your family were also dealing with physical threats, racial slurs, and other discrimination. This is the disturbing reality for our Asian American members, neighbors, and fellow believers. That's how we were trying to frame this last year. Again, we wanted to shed light, but what's fascinating is, unfortunately now, as I said a moment ago, we have to add death to this, not just racial slurs, not just physical threats, actual threats, actual assaults, actual battery that we've had to stand and see, and our Asian American brothers and sisters have had to endure. And so again, this conversation is relevant. This conversation is needed. And we're going to go ahead and go forward, but let me introduce our panelists. I want to read their bios, and their bios will also be put in the chat for us. And also, if you have any questions for us tonight, please click the Q&A button and type your questions in there. Do not put them in the chat. We have some people who are curating the questions, and they will be curating the questions from the Q&A button. Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Christine Yu, who is a family medicine physician in private practice in the city of Burbank, or the Burbank area, with outside interest of music. Christine and her wonderful husband, Anson, who, by the way, is going to have a wonderful art exhibit the last weekend of this month. They have two college-age children, and they've been members of fellowship for 6 years. Our next guest will be Jennifer Elrod, who has a master's in management and HR and currently works in higher education. Jennifer is a 2020-2021 PAAC fellow. She has been a part of the fellowship family for over 5 years and serving with the Center for Racial Reconciliation over the last 4 years in multiple capacities. She's amazing. She has facilitated table talks on being mixed and biracial and seeing your neighbor through food and culture. Jen has served as a host for over 20 workshops. Jen, I actually did not realize it's been that many. Thank you. Jennifer is also a resident foodie and Yelp writer, loves the beach, bread, baking, and cooking. And I know that because during this pandemic, on several occasions, she's brought our family baked goods. And she will be launching a picnic collective company with other women of color from a fellowship this summer, where international moments of fellowship around the table can be created. Jen believes everyone has a seat at the table. Our third panelist will be Tom Sung, who's a good friend of mine as well. Well, heck, everybody who's on the panel is a good friend of mine. So let me just state that. Tom is currently the Director of Outreach and Communications for the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. The department guides the 99 Los Angeles neighborhood councils in meeting their mission to increase public participation and make government more responsive to local needs. Love of community and definitely love of the Lakers are what drives Tom, as evidenced by him being with the department for 20 years. Tom earned his BA in sociologist with a specialization in education from the University of California at Los Angeles, with an MA in executive masters in leadership from the University of Southern California. He and his lovely wife live in Altadena and are parents to 3 pugs. Our next guest is Chandler Yan, who is a Chinese native and a freelance sales professional working with different influencers online. Chandler considers himself a global citizen, which he actually is. We always talk about things of the world, and is passionate about embracing different cultures and languages. Chandler wants to encourage others to have more curiosity, to listen, and to start a conversation with groups who have been marginalized in the United States. Another dear friend of mine, Susie Gomez, is Canadian by birth, Korean by heritage, Mexican by marriage, and American by immigration. Susie is passionate about matters surrounding reconciliation, justice, and the gospel. Susie and her husband, Marcos, met at Fuller Theological Seminary while they were getting their master's in intercultural studies, and now have 4 beautiful Latin Asian babies. After 14 glorious years in South Central, they now live in Long Beach. And last but not least, our final panelist is my dear friend, David Katani, who was born in the United States and to Japanese immigrants. David received his master's in education from UCLA and worked as a public high school teacher for 8 years in a low-income Black and brown neighborhood in South Los Angeles. In 2011, he transitioned from teaching to living, learning, and loving in LA's East Side. He's been living in the neighborhood and serving with New Life Community Church, Lincoln Heights, ever since ever since with his wife and brilliant Korean American PhD in cognitive science and game theorist, and their two young boys. New Life is a cross-race, cross-class church made up predominantly of working-class Latinos. David is currently an associate pastor there, fundraising through servant partners with a passion for discipleship making. Those will be our panelists, and we're going to bring our first panelist on, Dr. Christine Yu. Christine, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Oh my goodness, our friend Anson is here. I didn't think you were going to be here, brother.
I didn't either.
Well, we have a special treat. Anson was with us along with Christine last year. So I will be asking both of you these questions. And so we're going to start with the medical, and a lot has changed in these 14 months. The country is opening up, the state of California is opening up, but there's a lot of confusion and a lot of just people with different perspectives and ideas about what's going on in connection with COVID-19. So could you tell us what the latest data is for COVID?
The latest data is there have been about 164 million cases and 3.4 million deaths, reaching 220 countries worldwide, with the United States reporting the highest number of both cases and deaths. So we are on the downswing, but globally, there are some countries, including India, that are seeing severe second or third wave COVID infections. They had a lull in January and February, but the thinking is that with relaxed precautions, new variants, no vaccine, and mass gatherings, it was sort of the perfect storm to see some of these surges. So the numbers, unfortunately, at this point in India are staggering. Our own country, after an astronomical rise in December and January, we're seeing a steady drop. And with the rollout of vaccines in January, February, and March, we are now finally at the lowest levels of new cases since last July. Yeah, lots of highs and lows. Mm-hmm. California and LA County in particular, we have the dubious distinction of having been the epicenter of the whole world with cases and deaths. Mm-hmm. Now we actually are the lowest cases per capita in the United States. Yeah, as from the medical perspective, it is hard to forget the tragedy, the overwhelming loss, the overflowing ICUs, the hospitals that were just full to the brim. And it feels very much like the rollout of these really effective and safe vaccines is the answer. It's part of the miracle that we were praying for.
Wow, that's amazing. So what does it mean that the state is opening up now? I mean, what does that mean for us as congregants or as citizens? What does that mean for us?
Yeah, it's a lot of confusion in that, right? Statistically, it makes sense to think about opening up. We have upwards of 60% of people that have had at least one vaccine. We have, a low amount of cases, but that means we have 30-something% of people not vaccinated yet. We have potentially new variants. We have a lot of travel that's going to start up. So we have to be vigilant. We have to be careful. And with the CDC, don't wear a mask. Now you can wear a mask. Now you can take off your mask. I mean, it's just been really confusing. And with them making pronouncements without giving states or local entities time to sort of prepare, unfortunately, the latest one was fully vaccinated individuals can take off their masks indoors and outdoors. But that kind of puts the burden of compliance on like a business owner, right? So California has decided that they're going to stick with current policy, which is fully vaccinated. Everybody should keep their masks on indoors until June 15th. If our numbers are low, then they're thinking about adopting that policy. So, that's going to allow for some time to prepare. But I think all of it is going to be about extending some grace to people, because there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of mixed messaging. There's a lot of people who don't understand or hearing from different sources. So I think we're just going to have to be patient as we start seeing things open up. So should be gradual.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good. I'm wondering, so with what you just said in terms of what California is asking us to do, which is if you're fully vaccinated, continue to wear a mask, would that be your recommendation as well in terms of how we should move forward?
Yeah, I think that the longer that we can keep protected, the more time it allows for more people to get vaccinated, the lower the numbers that we might have, and the lower the chance of a surge coming back. So we do know more about the virus, that it is primarily aerosolized. So the danger is going to be like in an enclosed space with masks off with people who might not be vaccinated. So that's going to be where we're going to potentially see things come back.
Yeah, that's so good. And just wondering, Anson, is there anything that you would want to add to anything that Christine said, or even double down on something that she may have said?
Sure. Again, I think the CDC guidelines are actually, they're not bad guidelines. I think the problem with it is that there was no coordination with how to go about those guidelines, and they kind of just plopped it down. So there's no time for the states to actually coordinate what to do. And a lot not only has to do with the vaccine, but it's also the rate or what's happening, the COVID percentages actually in that particular state that actually has to be taken into consideration. So going back to the guidelines in California, so if you are vaccinated and everyone indoors, is vaccinated, it's okay not to wear a mask and to get together. So, so it's really in public places that we're unsure of the vaccination states of others that we should probably still be masked.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly helpful. I unfortunately a few weeks ago had to fly to New Jersey for a funeral for my uncle, and all of my older relatives had been vaccinated. And I can't tell you how impactful. I mean, some of them even started crying that they were able to take their mask off, that they were able to actually hug each other. And so this is a powerful thing that you're saying, that, if you're inside and you're vaccinated, that you can start to relate the way that we used to relate before. I know myself, I've been in a lot of awkward situations. Do I fist bump? Do I elbow bump? Do I handshake? So, I think the caution for all of us, though, is just to continue to be vigilant and careful. And so thank you all so much for your deep commitment to our community as doctors, as healthcare professionals. Thank you for our friendship, and just thank you for all that you do for fellowship. We really are grateful for y'all. And thank you for coming back 1 year later to talk about this important topic. So what we would like to do, and I actually forgot to do it before we jumped into talking with Christine and Anson, is this is going to be interactive. And so we're going to have some poll questions, and we're going to actually do a poll question before we go to our next panelist. And this is something that some data we would like to just collect. And the poll question is, did you attend last year's webinar, Justice and Part 1, COVID-19 and the Asian American Experience? And the second poll question is, what brought you to the webinar tonight? And so if you answer those, and in a moment, the results will populate and you'll be able to see them on the screen. So there we have it. We have, in terms of folks who are members of the AAPI, it's 58%, which is great. And you want to grow in your allyship is 42%. And then if you attended last year, 53% of you said you have, and then 47% said that you haven't. For those who haven't, welcome to the webinar. We're glad you're here to join us on this. And so we're going to move forward and go to our next panelist, our next guest. And that's going to be Jennifer Elrod. Welcome, Jennifer. How are you doing tonight? I hear you're not even in California. Where are you?
Hi, John. I am currently in Seattle, Washington. I just landed a couple of hours ago, which is, I always like to give an acknowledgement of the land that we are on. So I'm originally from San Gabriel Valley. I live in the San Gabriel Valley, which is Tongva Kisva land, but I'm tuning in from Duwamish land here in Seattle for the weekend with my PAC cohort, which stands for Progressive Asian American Christians.
Thank you. So you're still working and you're still, so that's really good. So Jen, last year we had a historical perspective and we want to bring that in, but to do it a little bit different this year, could you speak on the intergenerational impact and the rise of anti-Asian violence that's occurred over the last 14 months?
Absolutely. So I want to read some headlines to you. So a 94-year-old Thai immigrant slashed across the face. A 91-year-old woman shoved to the ground. 2 Asian women stabbed on public transit. These are the headlines that we are reading and that we are seeing. In February, I lost my grandfather on my mother's side, and my grandparents were married for 54 years. And since the passing and with the rise of Asian violence, I've gone to go visit my grandmother a lot more frequently. And I remember visiting her right after there was a recent New York assault on March 29th of this year of a 65-year-old Filipino American woman. She was a grandmother who was pushed to the ground while walking to church and then repeatedly kicked in the head. And there was a security guard that you can see on camera witnessing the event and choosing to close the door. And he closes the door to the building, and we're seeing more and more of these attacks. And then the day after Atlanta happened, a 70-year-old woman fought back. It was the first time we've heard in the news of someone fighting back against their attacker. And she fought back. The day after, 6 Korean women were murdered at their jobs in Atlanta. And so as I was leaving my grandmother's house that day, she hugged me tightly and she said, "Be safe." And I remember crying my whole way home that day, because here's my 79-year-old grandmother who's just lost her husband of 54 years, and she has no idea what's happening. As an immigrant, she has no idea what's happening, the severity of it with the elderly and with being Asian. And so for myself, I fear for her in public spaces. I live in an Asian neighborhood, and I've noticed more of my elderly neighbors walking with sticks to protect themselves. We saw Dr. Bill Watanabe talk about that in his recent post with us. And I've told my friends again and again, we are living this real life episode of What Would You Do? But instead of John Quijones appearing and asking, what would you do? It's our humanity. It's our humanity that continues to show up. And so like my question is, what would you do? People who are in the audience who will be watching this later, what would you do? Would you stop and step in against Asian elderly attacks? Or would you be the security guard who closed the door and looked the other way? Will we speak up in the boardroom when we witness microaggressions? Will we speak up when there's a joke at someone's expense of their imago Dei and how God has created them? Will we say, that's not funny? Will we interject? We have to be able to say, like, this is not appropriate and this is not okay. And hate is learned, and we have to be willing to stand against this history of hate and these repetitive stories of hate that we're seeing specifically against our elderly, because like my heart is grieved the idea of someone pushing down a grandma, like pushing down my grandma. And like, I can't help but put these stories and feel the realness of them as we're hearing about them.
Yeah. Wow. That's such painful stories. And I love how you're framing and putting the onus on us that, again, last year we were so hopeful, and now we have to be more vigilant, we have to be more pointed in our questions. And you saying, what would you do? And so how do you how the historical underpinnings of this continuing to show up today?
Yeah, so I'd love to define some stuff for us as I talk about this. So I love table talks. We've had 2 rounds so far. And so this last winter session, I went through a table talk taught by Pastor Chase and Pastor Angela, and we read Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes's book that states, and I'll quote this here, but racism is not about our feelings, nor is it about our attitudes, intentions, or behavior of individuals. Racism is an interlocking system of oppression that is designed to promote and maintain white supremacy. The notion that white people, including their bodies, aesthetics, beliefs, values, customs, and culture, are inherently superior to all other races and therefore should yield dominion over the rest of creation, including other people groups, the animal kingdom, and earth itself. And so that's from the book, I Bring the Voices of My People. And so it's this system, the historical underpinnings that I'm seeing it's the system of racism that's described in the quote that has really laid this foundation of indifference that we're experiencing now. We have a long history in our country of racism. And even we've seen the severe resurgence of racism and xenophobia, specifically xenophobia within the Asian population that we have experienced. And so I want to make it clear that white supremacy does not equate to white people, but it's a system that is at play and that is built within the very fabric of our nation. And so xenophobia, which is defined by historian and author Erica Lee, is a fear or hatred of strangers who are foreign. And so because we have an association of America and American as being white or synonymous to white, Asian folks are seen as other, are seen as foreign. And so over this last year, since our first COVID injustice video, we've seen a rise in anti-Asian hate that Pastor Scott talked about, but we've seen 3,900 reported incidents from March of 2020 to February of 2021. And that's just incidents that are reported, whether microaggressions or bullying. And so we've learned over the last few weeks from Pastor Albert, who is absolutely an ally with our community, through his Good News Today and his sermons, that the words that we use create worlds around us. So when we use words like China virus, Kung flu, we see the direct correlation of these attacks. When people still use words like Chinaman, chink, or go back to your country, we've heard these words repeated over and over again in the 139 years that we've had since the Chinese Exclusion Act. I'm in my mid-30s now. I was 7 years old the first time I heard someone tell my mother to go back to her country. And she was a legal citizen here. And I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley, and I was taught racism began with Pearl Harbor. But as I found myself 2 summers ago walking through Angel Island and Manzanar with the Civil Rights Tour, which hopefully we will get in the year 2022. But when we read books like The Making of Asian America by Dr. Erica Lee, we see that history that I was taught as a child isn't true. Our country has a long history of racism that has been against Asian and BIPOC people. I mean, we're on stolen land to begin with. And so there's a huge historical context that we see continuing to be brought forward.
Thank you. So, I mean, with that history, what myths and stereotypes are still with us that need to be addressed?
Yeah, that all Asians are the same. We're not a monolith. I personally am a mixed Asian American woman. So I am Filipino and Chinese, mixed in with some European descent in there as well. And so that means that my experience and each Asian person's experience is unique, and we are not all in one the same. So just because you like boba and you like ramen and you enjoy California rolls does not mean that you understand, see, or know your Asian brothers and sisters, your neighbors. Our diaspora is so diverse. There's no single one experience. And so I would love to take a quick chat poll, not a poll, but they call it a waterfall comment. And so if you were on with us last week and you know the answer, don't cheat. But in LA County alone, I would love for you to enter into your chat. Don't hit enter till I say go. But how many AAPI groups do you think are in LA County alone? So for example, Filipino, Korean, etc. Are some examples. So On the count of 3, I would love you to hit enter in the chat of how many AAPI groups do you think make up LA County? So 1, 2, 3, go. Hundreds, 53, 90, 300, 205, 30. So there are 30 different AAPI groups alone in LA County, and that's just from the 2010 census. When we get the new census data, we will see an increase in that. I recently learned in my cohort, though, that census workers are taught to identify homes that don't answer the census based on stereotypical markers. So let's say you have bamboo outside of your home, they're going to identify you as an Asian family on that census. So one more quick waterfall comment. Last week in the webinar, we also learned that there are a lot of Asian languages and dialects. So I would love to get a guesstimate in the entire world, how many Asian dialects do we think that we have? So type that into the chat and I'll have you hit enter in 3, 2, 1, go. 269, 445, thousands, 2,097 Asian languages and dialects alone, meaning we are not the same. We all have different stories. I was sitting recently in a meeting at work, and someone had asked if we were witnessing an actual increase in Asian violence or if there was just more media coverage. And I was kind of taken back by the question because their tone of the question was, is what's happening real? Are we really seeing the reality, or is it just the media? We like to blame the media on either side of a lot of things. And so it was hearing this question that it continues to show me that the model minority myth, a myth that says all Asians are successful and don't need help, and it's a myth that's been around for decades. It's a myth that was created to pit us against other people of color, and keep us from important equity conversations. And it's so important that we have these equity and equality conversations because Asian Americans need equal opportunity in academia, in the workforce, in management, and government welfare. 12 out of 19 Asian origin groups have poverty rates that are high or higher than the United States average. Asian American women are paid 85 cents for every dollar paid to a white man. Burmese women are paid 52 cents to every dollar paid to a white man. And so when we don't acknowledge the disparities that we see within the Asian American community, and knowing that this community is extremely diverse, we oftentimes can ignore and marginalize Asian women in these sectors, where it's really important that we're getting the resources that are needed by not slapping an Asian label. Asians have money, Asians are successful. So it's really important that we understand those disparities, and even to pick a lane of an area that we want to focus in on and that we want to be able to lean into, which is something we talked about last week.
Yeah, man, Jen, that's just so good. I love how you're weaving in the different myths that have happened historically. And I love the fact that you talk about that these myths are used to pit other people of color against Asian Americans, to keep us from talking about real equity, to keep us from talking about real racial righteousness and racial reconciliation. Thank you so much for all that you've shared. Are there any last words that you want to share?
I think if you want to eat my lumpia, my food, you need to stand with me in solidarity. And it's as simple as that. I want others to see and know us, not because I'm your token Asian friend, but because you truly care about the heart of who we are as people individually, and that we're diversifying our social media feeds, that we're diversifying the voices that we get to hear. And John you told them, if you're friends with me, you will be blessed.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will. Be
blessed with food. So you will be blessed with food. So
wait, not just food, but we will be blessed with yeast. When there was a yeast shortage, Jen came to our house and saved the day so that my family could make bread as well. So if you're friends with Jen, she will definitely hook you up. Jen, thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure there'll be some questions at the end from our audience, and that'll give you an opportunity to come back on. We want to shift gears a little bit. So we've talked about the medical, we've talked about the connections with history and the current situation of what's going on, the threads that we see from history up to the present. Now we want to just kind of take a step back and just talk a little bit about some personal stories. And so I'm going to have Tom Sung come on. He's a good friend of mine. Tom has traveled. Tom and his wife have traveled with me for workshops and trainings and things like that. And so, Tom, welcome. How are you doing this evening?
I'm muted. Sorry. Hi, John. There you are.
Okay, so Chandler's going to join us. Chandler, how are you doing also?
Pretty awesome, man.
Good. Chandler, you've traveled the country with me as well, going on both the Asian American Civil Rights Tour as well as the Southern Civil Rights Tour. So this is good. This is a family reunion. So I want to ask both of you then, and you can pick on who's going to go first. How's this year impacted you? I know personally, just from having conversations with you, and actually, I think I want to start with you, Chandler, because I think talking with you over this year has been so informative for me and instructive, because you as an immigrant coming to this country, how has it impacted you being Chinese?
I think that the biggest impact is from a social aspect. First of all, that because I'm pretty much, I never hang out with anyone in person. And particularly because of the Asian hate crime, especially the big ones in Atlanta, Georgia, I think that I typically stay at home at night. I don't really go out because I don't feel safe. And I think this habit probably will be kept going forward as well. Mm-hmm. And I tend to stay in my own city of Alhambra, which is 50% Asian population here. It's very safe. I don't typically go to other cities too much. So I do consciously aware of the situation, especially in my apartment building. There are other folks, including my landlord, they have completely opposite views about the pandemic compared to mine. So I need to be cool and I'm very aware of my behavior and everything when I go out and come back home. So these are the subtleness that is having some sort of impact on me because of the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember our conversations. We would do these Zoom calls, and for a long time you hadn't even gone outside, right?
Yep.
You didn't go travel. You had your groceries brought in, all of that.
Yeah, everything delivered. Yeah.
How did that impact you? I mean, just in terms of socially, like just not coming into contact with people at all, because you live by yourself, right?
Right, I live by myself. So it is a little bit weird at the beginning. I think everything is on the Zoom. And I have to get used to it because it's just psychologically, I don't feel safe going out. I don't know what's going to happen. Especially we have completely two different groups here in the States, while versus in Asia is very united. Everyone just kind of follow the instructions and everything. So I think here it tends to be more crazy, kind of like gets on my nerves. So I would rather protect myself a little bit more than just going out and potentially have to facing some sort of challenge and risk or unexpected things happen to me. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. How about you, Tom? How's this year impacted you?
Just John, just hearing, Chandler, just hearing what you were saying right now. This is the first time from last year that I felt, I'm going out still, but just going out at night, feeling the sense of, hey, it's something going to happen to me, and I never felt that before, in my life. So it's kind of so that was like a surreal feeling. And then I was thinking, this is COVID 1 year later, and I was thinking to the question you asked me last year about why is it important to report hate crimes, and what is the stats with hate crimes, and hearing Pastor Scott earlier giving those stats, and going forward to this year, have things gotten better? It's a little disheartening that where we are right now. So on a personal level, that not that I fear for my life so much, but just feeling like, man, that things have not gotten better, but where the hope and the lining of that is that I think that because of what's happening now, that just what I'm seeing is that a lot more Asian Americans are speaking up more. Like enough is enough. That there's just more of a voice out there. So that's kind of like where I'm at a little bit right now. So.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for that. It's incredibly sad just hearing this, that added fear and that added caution that both of you are talking about when you do go out, especially in light of like the city, the state, the country is kind of opening up.
Yeah.
We're becoming more mobile. And then there's this hesitancy among you about being as mobile as you used to be. So I'm wondering, and both of you can answer this, what is justice look like for the AAPI community? What does that mean to you? What does that look like for each of you in terms of, what does justice look like?
Yeah. Do we go or to Chandler?
Go ahead, Tom.
Okay. What is, I'll say it this way, that and Jenny was giving a plug to the center's table talks, and I will do the same thing. Okay. And I had the first table talk that I helped co-facilitate with was on our allyship, and that was a beautiful time. And we did this one recently, I think in January, on allyship again. And many of you know my wife, Erin Takeuchi, who's also on the podcast with John Williams here, the Structure Peacemaking. I could give that plug. Okay.
I'll pay you your money. I'll Venmo you later.
Okay, please. Yeah, please do. But so we were doing this allyship conversation again. And she came up to me, she says, Tom, it's important to talk about allyship, right? But then you have to talk about Asian American allyship too. And it didn't click for me at that point. Because when we talk about allyship, a lot of it is the BLM or George Floyd. That's how do we, as other ethnicities, support the Black community in their allyship, right? And sometimes maybe that's just our default. Well, why do Asians need allyship, etc., right? But then from the second table talk, we had 4 or 5 Asian Americans in there that talked about, that some of the challenges as they were going through as well. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, we need to do something about this. So once again, you have to say your wife is right. Okay, but then I think the challenge we asked the question, John, about what is AAPI, justice for the AAPI community is that we have justice without feeling guilty about it. Because sometimes I feel, because what that means though is that, we're getting all these hate crimes, we're getting pushed down, but it's always there's a but we're not going through slavery. We're doing all this happening, but we're not getting, this is happening to us. There's always this guilt of, of this guilt of, oh my gosh, we don't have so bad as other people, right? So I think the justice is that we have to release that feeling of feeling guilty of the but the justice is that, hey, if something is wrong with you, if racism is against you, go back to your country. When things like those happen, then no, that's wrong. And it's okay to say that's wrong without the but. And I think that would be the first step, I think, in just getting rid of that but for the AAPI community, So I think that's part of it, I think that's important.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think as a non-Asian, I think it would be important for me or for non-Asians to not get into, especially other people of color and Black and Indigenous folks, to not get into what some have called oppression Olympics, right? So
right.
Oppression is oppression, and people suffer from it. And so we don't have to compete. I don't have to say, well, my suffering is greater than your suffering. We're suffering. And so I love how you're saying for Asian Americans to say, yeah, we're suffering and these things are happening, and taking that word out, taking the but out. I think likewise for people of color, it's not, you guys are suffering, but you should look at us. Again, it should really be this true solidarity that we have with each other, that we're going to fight for the liberation of everybody and not just Black folks or Indigenous folks or just Asian folks, but we're going to fight for everybody. Chandler, what about you? What does justice look like for you?
In addition to what Tom suggested, I think that I wanted to encourage people to start a peaceful, healthy conversation first. I think that our voice needs to be heard, but in the meantime, we need a participation from the other brothers and sisters outside of Asian community. And I think a lot of times people worry too much about because they don't know how to talk about these kind of things. what I encourage is that being vulnerable, because we can tell your intention is you really want to learn more. So we are okay and totally open to that conversation. But I think that if it's just one-sided efforts has been put out there, we need the other part to kind of put in some effort as well in order to really make some actual changes, particularly for any similar situation that could happen going forward. So step up and asking questions, just like back in school, that you have questions for professors, just ask. You don't have to be shy. You don't have to worry too much or overthink about it, because we can tell your intention is good. It's totally fine.
Wow, thank you so much. That's just been so rich and so good. So we're gonna get some participant engagement, and we want to take another poll right now. Jen said something that was really powerful, and it's a simple question: what would you do? And just kind of in light of thinking about that, the two questions that we have for this segment is: what anti-Asian hate have you witnessed or experienced over the last year? And when you hear about the continued attacks against the Asian community, how does it make you feel? And so the two questions are up there for you to answer. What anti-Asian hate have you witnessed or experienced over the last year? And when you hear about these continued attacks, how does that make you feel? So it'll take a moment for the responses to populate. And you can check multiple answers. So it's not just limited to one thing, unfortunately. And so go ahead and continue to respond to those questions. We want, again, your participation in this. And as you're answering those questions, I just want to remind you that if you have any questions for our panelists, that you can click the Q&A button, and write your questions in there. And then we will curate those questions and we will address them to our panelists a little bit later on. So what are the results of the halfway poll? So what we have is we have 38% staring, we have shaming or humiliation or any forms of jokes, 25%, 50% using the ugly terms Chinese virus or Wuhan virus, and then not patronizing Asian American or Asian owned businesses, 56%, verbal harassment, 6%, online harassment, 31%. Wow, anti-Asian or xenophobic graffiti or memes, 38%. So this is really significant. And then the second question, 81% of you feel anger, 31% of you feel rage. And I always like to make the distinction about anger and rage because they are different things. And so I appreciate us having that on. 44% feeling nervous, 31 shocked, 6% disillusioned, 13 paralyzed, 50% disgusted, and 19% impatient. I love that response as well, because impatience leads to action. And so thank you so much for participating in our second poll. We're going to shift to Dave and Susie, our pastors, who are going to be talking with us. And Susie, David, how are y'all doing this evening?
Doing good. Thank you for having us.
Good. Hey, Dave, good seeing you. I think I'll ask you first, Susie. So how does, this is a question that we ask in our workshops and we kind of work through. And how does Scripture inform us in the work of justice? What's your perspective on that, Susie?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me first because I know that Dave has a very thorough and very thoughtful response to this. So I'll just give you a simple answer that I think is really important. I think that particularly when you read the Gospels, when you look at the life of Jesus, you can't not see how central the work of justice was in the life of Jesus. Cornel West, Dr. Cornel West, is famously known for saying a lot of things, but one of his famous quotes is that justice is what love looks like in public. And so when you look at the life of Jesus, Jesus was very public in the way that he loved people, and he loved people on the margins. He loved people, you know, if you want to say it this way, he loved them scandalously. He loved them in a very countercultural way. And so the way that Jesus is proximate to people on the margins, the way that he was intentional about forming friendships and widening the circle of those who could belong. When you start looking at the Gospels through that lens, you can't not see how justice is central to who Jesus is and the model that we should follow.
I love that. He loved them scandalously. That's so good. That's so good. David, what do you think? How does scripture inform us in this work of justice?
I mean, Susie's right on. I mean, we have the model when we feel lost. What if God took on flesh? How would he have interacted? And we have that model, and what a grace that is to us. And he loved us that way. That's why we're even here in this conversation. When you look at the whole counsel of scripture, it's consistent. What does justice mean biblically? And how I've read it is it's exercising authority rightly toward others, especially in protecting the vulnerable. It's not just punishing the bad, but protecting the vulnerable. And scripture teaches us that the work of justice is not optional, but it's literally required of us, Micah 6:8. And moreover, it's intimately tied with our relationship with God. Isaiah chapter 1 reminds us we can't play at worship and religion with blood on our hands. In verse 17, he wants us to learn to do right, seek justice. And what does that mean? Defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. And that's what Jesus, you saw, who he stood up for, and who he spoke to, and who he spoke and challenged. And in the same way, right? Jesus, he tells us in Matthew 5 that if we're offering our worship to God and we know a brother or sister has something against us, we should first go and be reconciled to them. Then come and offer your gift. He sees a connection, right? And note in that passage, it's an uncomfortable part of it that Justo Gonzalez really kind of helped me see. He said, note that the one who has caused the harm should be the one who initiates. And that's something for us to consider, because injustice, it interrupts our intimacy with God. That's why in Mark 12, when Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandment? He gives us two of them. Love God and love your neighbor. And we have a tendency to separate the two when God sees them intimately connected.
Yeah, that's so good. I love how you said that justice it's not optional and it's tied with our relationship with God. I love that because that's the faith and works that's talked about in the New Testament so eloquently. And just kind of with that, what should the church be doing? I know that after most of our trainings or webinars, that's the main question that believers ask if they've been inspired or convicted in what we're talking about is, what do we do? What can the church do? And either one of you can start on this one.
Okay, I'll go first again, but then you have to go first on the next one. You know, there's this pastor named Albert Tate who curated this preaching masterclass, and I believe that this year the tagline itself is worth the registration, because I can't get this out of my head. Discipling out racism. Disciple out racism. This is the task at hand for people who are in pastoral ministry, a preacher, lay people, anyone who calls themselves a part of the Big C Church. We have to reckon with this. Like, we have to disciple out racism. And so there are so many steps in doing that. We first have to acknowledge that racism is a problem, and that's something that many churches, including the Asian American church or the Asian church, has. We're still trying to get to that first step, acknowledging that it is a problem and what it looks like, and then preaching about it from the pulpit. infusing it into the DNA of our churches. If you're a pastor or a preacher, or you serve in some form of leadership, we have to have a plan. We have to be intentional. This is a discipleship thing. You may want to form a center for racial reconciliation, right? You may want to incorporate it into the DNA of the church in that way, and hire incredibly gifted and talented and anointed people to lead the charge in that. So, you know, all this to say, this is not a paid endorsement. I'm not on staff at Fellowship, but really y'all are doing such a great job. And I am always pointing people to what Fellowship is doing, and how really we all need to be on the same boat doing this. Here's another thing. Not only is it our responsibility in the church, especially if we're teaching or preaching or leading and training and equipping, to do that within our own church, but we have to be challenging our brothers and sisters. I have a friend who said that she feels like it's her mission. She's got influential pastor friends in Orange County or out in Colorado Springs, or typically very conservative places, where she's saying, I am making it a point to have these one-on-one conversations with them because they trust me. We're not going to have these conversations online where you know, they might say something and just get butchered on social media. But she said it is a personal calling of mine to have these hard conversations, and so that's a responsibility that we all have as well. So that's what the church should be doing in part.
Man, I love the practicality of all of that, and you have to give me your Venmo account number for that huge endorsement. But seriously, Dave, what about you? What should the church be doing? What could you add on or double down in terms of what's already been said?
Oh man, there's so much. I want to acknowledge this year has been exhausting. You know, not for everyone. This is intense what we're going through, and I feel this is an opportunity God is giving us. He's revealing us. He's revealing things to us. You know, that's what apocalypse is, revealing. You know. What are we going to do? I think first and foremost, like, I think a lot of y'all are warriors, right? But how do you stay in the game, right? How do you stay in it? And first and foremost, we cannot bear this fruit of justice and righteousness without being attached to the true vine. I'm a Bible nerd, so like when Jesus says he's the true vine, it's like, okay, was there a fake vine? He's talking about something. Check out Isaiah 5, what he's talking about. He's talking about there was a vine, which was the people of Israel, and God was looking for the fruit of justice and righteousness, but instead he heard cries and bloodshed, right? So, and when Jesus says, I'm the true vine, y'all, it's like, okay, finally. But we got to remain in him if we're going to bear those sort of fruits. So do whatever you need to do, no matter what, to fight for your time with Jesus, because that's going to keep you going, and that's going to help you bear good fruit that people will be refreshed by. The Asian American church, you know, I'm talking to my brothers and sisters right now. This is the opportunity to press into race conversations. Finally, right? We thought this was just a black and white conversation. God's not going to let us get away with that, you know? So we got to press in. We know there's different ethnicities and flavors of the Asian American community, but at least one thing we're seeing in common is this marginality experience. We experience what it means to be on the margins, and that gives us an opportunity to be in solidarity with others who are in the margin. Right? And share resources. The way we love on our families and our kids, let's expand that and love on others, see them as family. And non-Asian believers, thank you for being here. You know, continue build relationships with us, right? Like, ask for our perspectives too. I know our suffering doesn't look the same, you know, but don't gaslight us because it doesn't look like your experience. That's okay. We're in this together. We need you. You need us. We need the body of Christ. So yeah.
No, man, that's that's so rich. And for our participants, this is being recorded. They just said a whole lot in that 3 or 4 minutes. And so please go back and rewatch this, or if you're one of those nerds who are able to take copious notes, please share them with us so that we can share them with everyone. We asked this question of when we're talking about the personal stories in terms of what can people do in terms of with justice. We had asked Tom and Chandler, what does justice look like? But I want to broaden that question for you two in terms of comparing it with systemic and individual justice or systemic and individual racism. What does systemic justice look like for the AAPI community? And so Dave, Susie said she was going to have you go first.
I mean, this is huge, so I'm not going to be able to do justice to
Right.
justice.
Answer it in 2 minutes or less, right? Yeah, we can't do that.
So towards us, I think a lot of people spoke to that. Just to know that we're not the only one speaking up, someone else is speaking up with us, helps us feel like we're not crazy, we're not alone, we're not just a model minority, and we're not perpetual foreigners either, right? We're people, you know. From us, it means that we care about systemic injustices affecting other neighborhoods too, not just our own, right? If we think of just the COVID impact, it has hit the Latino community 3 times harder, right? So, I mean, I'm talking about LA, Los Angeles, right? We need to be aware of the community that we live in. And if we want people to listen to us as Asian Americans, we need to be in relationship too with those that are different from us. And it means loving even when it's literally going to cost us. And that's putting our money where our mouth is, right? You know, yes, stop Asian hate, but how about we start some Asian love? You know, we've been at it, but I mean, real, like, what if the Asian community, the Asian American community was known not so much about how much we earn, but about how much we love? Because man, if you've ever been loved by an Asian before, it's some good loving, it's some holistic loving, right? What if we brought that to the table? Because our shalom, like in Jeremiah 29, it's wrapped up in the shalom of others. We can't just have our own shalom. That's not shalom, right? But when we seek the shalom of others, that's good for us too. And we got to remember, you know, early church, most of them weren't Roman citizens, but many of us in the US, we're privileged to be citizens in a democracy. So as we have opportunity, as it says in Galatians 6, let's do as much good as we can for all people. And that means, okay, there's a lot. Choose one issue that you sense God leading you to. Yeah. Affordable housing, hello, you know, that's a good one. Learn about it. Call your local reps, 5calls.org, 5calls.org. It's great, man. Get involved in local politics. You know, hey, if you're a constituent, you can make more impact on the local level than on the national. Get connected to meaningful coalitions, right? So you're not doing it by yourself, okay? There's good ones of faith, not perfect, but you can't do it by yourself. Attend some local meetings, most of which have space for public comment. So that's when we start.
So good, so good. How about you, Susie?
Yeah, that was so good. It was comprehensive, it was practical. I feel like I might just say a couple of things in the same thing, but in a different way. You know, when I think about the question, what does justice for the AAPI community look like? Right. You know, immediately I think, well, yeah, we need people to stand with us. We need people to stand for us. We need to know that our pain and the marginalization that we feel and experience we're not crazy for acknowledging it or for speaking out on it. But when you talk about what justice really looks like, justice is also empowering. So when we get to that place of recognizing that our pain is valid, we also are empowered to stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters as well. You know, the Black and brown issues, they're not just issues, they're personal. For myself and for Dave, I read a bit of your bio and saw where you're living. We have some similarities in the communities that we live in and love and learn from. And for me, it's deeply personal. My husband is Mexican-American, grew up in a Black and brown community, Southside Chicago. And I lived and learned and loved in South LA. Like South LA was my first experience of America. And it's what awakened me to what reconciliation and racial justice or racial righteousness ought to look like in the church. And so I think that when you talk about what justice looks like for the AAPI community, it's both, you know, you all standing in solidarity with us, but again, the language being, it's all of us, you know. So I am empowered to see a street vendor, a Mexican street vendor who gets attacked on the street, and see my abuelito in that, right? Or, you know, we identify, for me as a Korean Canadian who moved to America, but, you know, I moved right outside of Koreatown. And so I've heard the stories of my Korean brothers and sisters who talked about the pain of the 90s and the aftermath of what it was like to have Korean parents who owned liquor stores or corner stores or nail salons in the hood, right? And so just being honest about our pain and sharing those stories of pain is a part of the work of justice and reconciliation, really. So knowing that our pain is a shared pain, and, you know, living out solidarity.
Man, I really love it. Live, learn, love. Live, learn,
I
love.
took that from Dave.
Well, it's powerful. It's really powerful. Just in the few moments that we have left with you two, what should non-Asian believers be doing? We asked just what should the church be doing? We talked about the systemic injustice, but what should non-Asians, what should I be doing? What should other believers be doing with respect to this issue?
I'll
Dave, go ahead. Oh, okay, go ahead, Susie. Go ahead.
Dave will leave us with a bang. I know you've heard it a lot in different arenas, but really, you know, just be intentional about your learning and your listening, amplifying Asian voices. You know, I posted a book I'm putting myself on blast here, actually. So at the beginning of the month, beginning of AAPI month, I posted a picture of the book, The Making of Asian America, which Jen referenced, by Dr. Erica Lee. And it's a textbook, y'all. It's not an easy read.
You're right. I have it right over there.
Yes. I know some friends who took a year to read it together. So it was ambitious of me to say, during the month of May, I'm going to read this book. Who wants to read it with me? And then I had a bunch of folks who said, I'm in if you do a book club. And I was like, oh, I wasn't trying to do a book club, but okay. And people were saying, I'll read it with you. I want to. And I was like, I was surprised at how like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like how loved and seen I felt when my non-Asian brothers and sisters chimed in and said, I want to read that with you. I haven't done a book club yet, and I've only gotten through a couple of chapters, but it will get there. I just like the point of this story is that I felt loved in that solidarity.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Dave, how about you?
I mean, y'all have already some great stuff, man. So like, I don't know if I could add any more to that. It's so good.
No, that's good. That's fine. That's fine. Well, I know we're going to have some questions from our audience, and y'all will probably be put back on the screen. And so, but I just want to say from the depths of my heart, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for giving us the pastoral perspective. And we have to make that distinction. I mean, we as non-pastors have to listen and need to listen to your voices, because you're the oracles of God, and you're speaking such wisdom. And thank you so much for sharing with us. So we're gonna pivot a bit, and we're gonna pull some questions from the audience. And again, if you still have questions, there's still time to write those out. Click on the Q&A button and ask your questions, and they will magically come to me through my phone. So actually someone's texting them, and we already do have one question, and I want to bring Jen Elrod back on. And the question is, and this is a great one, because Dave said something really important, and I don't want this to be lost or missed, especially during this 14 or 15 months of shelter in place and being in a pandemic. And he had talked about it's been an exhausting time. And so the question kind of emanates from that. Jen, how have you practiced self-care?
Yeah, I think not only just self-care is important, but soul care. For myself personally, I think there is comfort in food. There's comfort in Asian food. And so for me, it's been really just having some traditional dishes from myself and my sisters. I went to a protest with Pastor Angela for AAPI Hate, and afterwards we got Taiwanese food. And some of it too, I think, is how do we not only care for ourselves, but how do we care for others in that? And part of that, I think, has also been this relational equity of what does it look like to purchase a meal. I know Pastor Susie had shared this a couple of weeks ago on her Instagram, but after Atlanta, someone else showed up and bought dinner for her family. I bought dinner for a family after the George Floyd verdict. And so part of that is solidarity and showing up in that way. But I think for me, it's taking time off social media and creating boundaries. It is I'm an Enneagram 2, so it's getting one-on-one time with people. It's allowing myself to cry, to write poetry of lament and process through that. It's reading books and just taking time to slow down. I'm going to give a plug to Pastor Christine Yisa's book. If you're an Enneagram 4, or if you're a 2, you go to a 4 in house, or if you know what Enneagram 4, this book that she just released, and it's AAPI Heritage Month, so please buy her book. But it provides a depth of soul of what it looks like to have your soul fully cared for. Another way that I am a huge fan of is the Black Liturgist on Instagram, has breath prayers about almost every day. So what does it look like to slow myself down and to bring myself into God's presence, to pray, to heal, and just to truly find rest, are ways that I've done it. Even today, landing in Seattle, I went and got a matcha latte and they put soft serve on it. We need to get on this in LA because it was amazing. But so part of that for me has been just taking time to rest and be with people and eat really good food. That's what I'm most looking forward to this weekend with my cohort, is eating a lot of really great food in a new place to explore.
Man, that's so good. That is so good. Thank you so much. So another question that's come up is, regarding witnessing hate crime, are there any good resources on how to intervene in a violent attack or a situation that feels like it's turning violent? I want to address this a little bit. I had the good pleasure or good fortune, and this goes along with what Susie said about amplifying Asian voices and amplifying other people. In all seriousness and candor, I appreciate all the wonderful things that all of the panelists have said about the Center for Racial Reconciliation. But the center would not be anything if it wasn't for my team and myself, leaning and digging in, practicing soul care, self-care, and looking to other folks to feed us and to inform us. And so one of the, I went to this seminar by an organization called Holla Back, HOLLABACK. And they have a wonderful, wonderful 60 minutes, and they are crisp, and it is just filled with wonderful information called bystander intervention. And you can go on their website, and again, it's the Hollaback, HOLLABACK website, and they have bystander intervention, and they give amazing resources. They have it on their website as well. But in addition to that, this training is amazing. And what's fascinating, there's 2,000 people on that training at a time. It's so powerful and so impactful. And their goal is to try to train all of us on the things that we should do. And so please seek out that website and attend that webinar. Is free. So there's no cost to you, and they run it a few times a week. So just jump on the website. So we have another question. I'm reading the text messages. I want to pull up, let me ask Susie to come back on, because I'd love to hear some resources that she may have as well. I'm going to put you on the spot, Susie. I'm sorry. But what are some resources that you'd recommend? That's just one that I talked about. Just some great things on how to intervene or how to stand with Asian Americans during that tense moment of verbal abuse or things like that.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared. Two things that I think of
Sorry.
right away, though. on the physical side, it's funny that Jen mentioned the John Quinones, the What Would You Do? I was like obsessed with that show. And I think it taps into that sort of like hero fantasy that we all have, where it was like, oh, if that was me, I would have done this. And, you know, you play out these scenarios and then the moment happens and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm being harsh here, but you know, you get on yourself and you're like, oh my gosh, I was a coward in that moment. I was not brave. I did not live up to the person that I think that I am. You know, when there's small moments, and we've talked about microaggressions too. So this may be the practical part that I'm talking about here. I think that even in the small moments, we have to exercise that muscle of being brave. So things that you in the past, and this is something that I know a lot of Asian folks, especially, you've lived your life just brushing things off, like, oh, I'm just gonna. It's strange if I make a fuss about that, or I think that we ought to get inspired by these courageous moments that we see often on social media these days. Like, did you see that interaction between the woman? She's a doctor, the Black woman with an older white man. They're on this Zoom call together, and he refuses to call her doctor. She corrects him. He calls her by her first name or whatever, and she corrects him and says, it's doctor. And he says, well, I'm just going by what's on your name here. And she doubles down, triples down. And she keeps saying, no, it's doctor. I would prefer for you to call me doctor. And he won't do it. And then he ended up getting fired because there was a social accountability. And so I think that for me as an Asian woman, I'm watching that like, oh my goodness, I'm so inspired. I never would have had the courage to do that, but maybe I will now. You know, and so there's small ways in which we train ourselves to be like, I'm inspired to do that in ways that might seem small, but you start small and it gets bigger. And then on the physical part too, my brother is actually, since he was 6 years old, has been in Taekwondo and has always been big on like, Susie, you need to know how to physically defend yourself. So I only went up to like green belt in Taekwondo. I just didn't have the discipline to keep going to class. But he always made sure that I knew some basic moves. If somebody comes at you like this, then you do this. And so I think just in that way, it's important to know how to defend ourselves physically. But I think the bigger thing and the more practical thing is learning how to exercise that courage muscle.
That's so good. That's good. I really appreciate it. Sorry that I put you on the spot, but those were such great responses. Someone asked in the Q&A, and I guess this was for me actually, if I could talk more about the distinction between rage and anger. And yeah, I can definitely do that. Maya Angelou once said in an interview, and she said, I have no bitterness, none, because bitterness is like cancer. It eats the host. Bitterness does not do anything to the object because it can eat the host to death. What I have is a readiness to rage. And if I see injustice anywhere, I channel my rage. I speak up. I do something about it. I do not harbor or nurture a little kernel of bitterness. And oh no, I know it will eat me up, and I'm here to stay and to be present right up to the very end. I feel rageful, I feel angry, but I refuse to be bitter because for me, just like Maya Angelou, we must speak up, we must do something. And so for me, that rage is, it's stronger than anger. For me, anger is something that kind of wells up based on an incident, but that rage is something that can well up in you. And for me, I think that we have a tendency, especially in the church, and I said this about a year ago, especially in the church, to be so afraid of anger and rage. We'll take that passage of scripture that says, be angry and sin not, but we'll really interpret it as, don't be angry, because we've never channeled or learned how to use our anger or our rage for justice, for righteousness. And so anger is a deeper emotion for me, but it's not a bad emotion. It's just that it's an emotion. Anger is an emotion as well, but and for me, again, it's something less than, it's something that can come and that can go, but that rage is something that kind of builds. It's like a number of instances of anger, but all of it has to be channeled and used, and none of it can become bitterness, just like Maya Angelou said. And so as we start to wind down, I want to actually bring on Anton Yu, because I have a very different question for you than what we've talked about tonight. And I'd love for you to do kind of a quick elevator pitch of your upcoming art exhibit. I'm so excited about it. And I would love to love for you to talk a little bit about it. And we want to invite everyone who's here, as well as invite your friends and your family to this wonderful exhibit. Anton, good evening again. I know I'm putting you on the spot now, but if you could talk about this would be great.
Well, this is kind of interesting because this is this whole COVID 1 year later, and I can just say that 1 year later, I painted a collection of work, and it's all based on my identity as an Asian American. I had this idea of painting a collection more than a year ago before even COVID hit. And it kind of stems about me being Chinese American, but it also touches on the subject of what we've talked about here in terms of model minority and what does it mean to be an ally. And I created paintings to kind of like show how I felt about all these different aspects. So I finally finished it, and it will actually be exhibited at my gallery downtown. It's actually in downtown LA in Chinatown, so even more appropriate. So I hope that you guys would plan on coming to join us in viewing the gallery. I think it creates great opportunities for discussion as well. So if you have friends that are non-Asian who really don't quite understand the Asian American experience, or you yourself are still a bit unclear about that, I think it's a great place to start. The gallery is called Exhale Unlimited. We can put the address in the chat. Okay, great. So, and it will be on Memorial Day weekend, Saturday, Sunday, 3 to 8 p.m. So you can grab some stuff in Chinatown, making an evening out downtown LA. Also will be open on Memorial Day from 2 to 5. So.
Thank you so much. I'm so looking forward. I want to get the sneak peek. So I will see it, and it will be a date with my wife and I. We are definitely going to get some really good food. So thank you so much, Anton, for doing that. And I love how you centered it back around to 1 year later. And I know if I asked all the participants who are here this evening, what is something that you've done 1 year later, something that you've learned 1 year later, there would be a multiplicity of things. And let's just keep leaning in. For us non-Asian folks, let's keep loving, seeing, listening to our Asian American brothers and sisters. Let's keep giving them space to share, to grieve, to mourn. Let's not rush them to get over it. But let's stand in solidarity. And for my Asian brothers and sisters and my Asian American brothers and sisters, I say as a fellow brother to you, we do love you, we do see you, we do want to constantly give you space, and we want to constantly learn from you. And so as we close, I just want to close us out with a quick word of prayer, but I want to say thank you to Hannah Belk, who's been behind the scenes, sending me a ton of text messages, making this evening run so smoothly, doing all the poll questions, posting all the bios and all of that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much, panelists. Each of you are very dear to me, and it is, I do not take it lightly that you've said yes to come on and be with us tonight, to share your stories, to share your wisdom, to share your pastoral commitment to us as a body of Christ. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And to those who came, the attendees, thank you for joining us. We will post this. This has been recorded, so we'll put it on our social media platforms, on our YouTube channel. We ask that you please share this with everyone. So let me just close this with a quick word of prayer. Gracious Father, we thank you that you have created everyone, that all of us are in your image, that no one is superior to another. And so, Lord, we ask that you would teach us as your children to love one another as you love us, to appreciate one another as you appreciate us, to affirm one another as you affirm us. Lord, be with us, be with everyone who joined us, be with those who will listen later on. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This has been a lot of fun. Have a great evening and have a great weekend. Take care.